Okay, settle down, class. Welcome to today's explainer. We're going to dive right in because today, well, we're tracking a true historical meteor. And to really get you to feel the grit, the glory, and honestly, the sheer terror of this era, I'm not just going to rattle off textbook dates. No, I want you to imagine I'm speaking to you as a veteran soldier, a grizzled old guardsman who literally marched in the mud under one of the most famous and infamous commanders in all of human history. We're talking about the ultimate outsider who ended up an emperor, Napoleon Bonaparte. Now, I want you to keep this one massive question burning in the back of your mind as we march through his life. Would you trade everything for greatness? I mean it. If you knew that chasing absolute greatness would hand you ultimate power, but it would also cost the lives of countless men and plunge an entire continent into total chaos, would you do it? Would you trade everything just to guarantee your permanent place in the history books? All right, here's our syllabus for today's march. We'll start with number 1, the outsider from Corsica. 2, the rise of a general. 3, master of Europe. 4, the Russian nightmare. 5, the final battle. And finally, number 6, hero or tyrant. Let's get to it. Section 1, the outsider from Corsica, a humble beginning. So, the year is 1769. We're starting on the rugged, really small Mediterranean island of Corsica. And let me tell you, when this kid was born, absolutely no one thought, ah yes, future ruler of Europe right there. No one expected him to be famous, let alone powerful. Actually, when he was shipped off to military school over in mainland France, he was a total outsider. He wasn't from money, plus he had this incredibly sick, obvious Corsican accent. So what happened? The richer, fancier French kids totally looked down on him. They sneered at him, he was bullied, and he was completely isolated. But, adversity has a really funny way of shaping giants. Because most kids, they would have completely crumbled under that kind of bullying, right? But not him. While all those wealthy students were out wasting time and goofing off, he hid away in the library. He literally obsessed over history, strategy, and war. He was absorbing the campaigns of ancient generals, constantly analyzing exactly what made empires rise and fall. In fact, our sources sum him up perfectly with a simple phrase, obsessed with greatness. That singular, unyielding drive, it was slowly preparing him in the shadows. It's like he was a coiled spring, just waiting for the perfect opportunity to snap open. And that brings us to Section 2, Rise of a General, Chaos into Opportunity. Because in the late 1780s and 90s, France is thrown into absolute total chaos. The French Revolution explodes, and it flips the world upside down. The old rulers and kings lose their power and, literally lose their heads. So suddenly, the door swings wide open for new leaders to step out of the smoke. Now imagine me there, boots deep in the mud, watching this brilliant young commander grab hold of that chaotic moment. Step 1, he proved himself in battle, time and time again. Step 2, his victories started making massive headlines back in Paris. It was honestly a lot like modern celebrity culture. Overnight, his name was suddenly on everyone's lips. Politicians couldn't help but notice him. But step 3, and the most important one for us in the ranks, he won our admiration. He had this intoxicating confidence that made ordinary soldiers willingly follow him straight into the fire. Moving to Section 3, Master of Europe, the unstoppable force. So pretty quickly, this former outcast becomes one of France's top generals, and battle after battle we just kept winning. Austria, Prussia, Italy, our enemies were completely scrambling to stop him. He was absolutely dominating the continent, and let me tell you, Europe was terrified. If you're wondering how we were so unstoppable, forget old-school military doctrine. Think of it more like a modern, highly disruptive business startup that's completely taking out slow, legacy companies. He didn't invent some crazy new weapon. He invented a new speed. Move faster, think faster, attack faster. He forced us to march faster than anyone thought humanly possible. He'd outthink the opposing generals, figure out their moves, and just smash into them before they could even set up their lines. It was simple, but it was utterly devastating. And then, we reach the absolute peak. The year is 1804, Emperor of France. Try to picture the sheer visual majesty of this moment. You have this soaring cathedral, these dazzling, heavy gold robes, a sparkling crown. The entire world held its breath. The kid who was mocked in the schoolyard was now the ruler of an empire, and kings genuinely feared his name. But On to Section 4, the Russian nightmare, the fatal flaw. Listen up, class, because absolute power almost always breeds fatal arrogance. And this brings us to his ultimate mistake. He launches an invasion into Russia with one of the largest armies ever assembled on the planet. At first, marching in during the warm summer, everything felt totally fine. But the visual contrast of what happened next is just haunting. Honestly, I still see it in my nightmares. That glorious, glittering coronation we just talked about, it became a distant, cruel joke. Because the Russians didn't even fight us directly. They just kept retreating, burning down their own towns as they went, so we'd have absolutely nothing. Then the real enemy showed up. Winter. The food entirely disappeared. The temperatures plummeted and became incredibly deadly. We were suddenly plunged into this desolate, freezing, white wasteland. Guys were just collapsing in the snow, freezing to death exactly where they fell. Our Grand Army completely collapsed and the retreat was a waking nightmare. Out there in the ice, our massive empire started to shatter. Section 5, the final battle, the dramatic return. So, following that absolute disaster in the snow, Paris fell. Our emperor was forced to surrender and they shipped him off into exile. Now, most leaders in history would have just accepted their fate, right? They just fade away into the history books. But not him. In one of the wildest, most shocking twists in all of history, he escapes his island exile and actually returns to France. For exactly 100 dramatic days, he reclaims power. The soldiers, guys like me, we flocked right back to his banners. But the rest of Europe, they instantly prepared for a massive, all-out war to stop him once and for all. The final showdown happened in a muddy little field in Belgium called Waterloo. The fighting was incredibly fierce, cannons roaring all day long, but the magic was just gone. This time, he lost. The unbeatable commander was decisively defeated, and it brought his unstoppable era to a very definitive, permanent end. Which brings us to our final section, Section 6, Hero or Tyrant, the Final Judgment. So let's step out of the mud of the past and get back into our classroom here. It's been over 200 years, and we have to judge the legacy of the man who literally redrew the map of Europe. Napoleon remains one of history's most famous leaders. But how exactly should we remember him? As history students, you've got to weigh the facts impartially. On one hand, he is deeply loved and admired by some. They point to his sheer brilliance and things like the Napoleonic Code. This was a totally new set of laws that revolutionized everyday life. It protected property and established equality under the law for common citizens, a huge deal. But on the other hand, he is heavily criticized and condemned by others. They point to the massive destruction, the endless wars, and the millions of lives lost simply to feed his vanity. But no matter which side of the debate you fall on, one fact is absolutely undeniable. He is impossible to ignore. So I'm going to leave you with this final thought before class is dismissed. We started today with the story of an outcast from Corsica who had big dreams. And we ended with a man whose raging ambition altered the very geography of Europe. Knowing the dazzling glory he achieved and the freezing, horrific misery he caused in equal measure, was his ambition worth the final cost? You tell me. Think on that. Thanks for joining me for this explainer, and I'll catch you in the next one.